Hello and welcome. This is Jake from Raise the Trident. This is part one of my four-part series where I got as many content creators in the Mariners space as I could into one place to answer some burning questions here. Those content creators are Jay's Trident Podcast, Colton and Joe from Mariner Mojo, Colby and Ty from Locked On Mariners, Lyle from the Marine Layer Podcast, the Jage page on Twitter, Couch GM, Sean Collins from the Collins Like It Is podcast, Patrick from Mariner Muse on Twitter, and Brady Farkas from the Refuse to Lose podcast. Everyone's links are going to be in the description, so I urge you to check them out before you get started. But without further ado, let's get into the video. One of the main words to describe this 2024 Mariners season is disappointing. They finished with a 85-77 record. They had a few less wins than they did in 2023. Would you say this season was more or less disappointing than the 2023 season?
No, I would definitely say this season was more disappointing than 2023 to me. One, there was less wins than 23, and I was kind of willing in 2023 to look at it and go, hey, they took maybe a brief step back before taking that next step forward, and then to see them kind of just take another step back overall in 2024 made it more disappointing. And then when you factor in having a 10-game lead in June, and then truthfully getting the last couple of weeks of the season and kind of knowing they weren't going to win the division, for me overall, I think 2024 does seem more disappointing than 23.
So 2024 was worse. I tried to actually think back and put myself in the emotional place that I was in 2023 and kind of going through it and seeing us, ride the roller coaster of riding Julio's, 240 WRC plus month that he had in August. And then, watching it all fall apart in September and being just like gutted. Right. But I think what helped was that there were also other sports for me that kind of kept me occupied at that time. So I was able to transition out easy. This year was harder. Just a couple of stats that I grabbed prior to this call. Outside, we obviously all know the 10-game lead was blown. That's only happened a handful of times. That one's pretty brutal as is. The AL West had the lowest winning percentage of any division in baseball. That's number 2. Number 3, Seattle actually went 32-20 against the division, which was tied for second of all teams against division opponents. By the way, the top 7 teams that had those records, essentially 30 wins or more against their own division, were the Mets in the playoffs, the Guardians in the playoffs, the Dodgers, the Brewers, the Orioles, the Royals. The Mariners were the only team in the top 7 with a 30-win record against their division to not make the postseason. They were plus 80 runs against their own division. They scored 4.5 runs and only allowed 3. But against everybody else, they were 53-57, a minus 11 run differential, barely scored 4 runs a game, gave up 4.1. And then kind of the thing that was really the biggest dagger, I felt like there was no real great team in the American League this year. I mean, you could make an argument for the Yankees and the Orioles, but they were very up and down. The Mariners went 24-36 against non-AL West teams if you remove the White Sox. Because again, I know that we don't want to necessarily always go back and forth on the White Sox and everything, but 24-36 against the AL, that's just not going to do it. And again, this team should have been better than what they were offensively. We watched a historically bad offense for 5 months. About 4 months before we got to Edgar and things kind of shifted in the right direction. But I mean, it was just an unwatchable brand of baseball for a long part of the season. And that was just really difficult for me and just made this entire year, like you said, disappointing is a great word, but it was difficult. It was a chore at times to watch baseball, and that's never a position you want to be in as a fan.
I think that Lyle put it best when I talked to him at one of the last games. He said that all the inertia from 2022 is gone. Anything that came from the playoffs in 22, everyone was pretty psyched going into 2023. And obviously, in the end, the Mariners didn't make it, missed it out by like a game or so. And then going into 2024, people were bummed, sure, but then they were like, okay, cool, another year. Daisy says hello. Another year. And then, but after this year, losing the 10-game lead to the Astros, I can't honestly think of a more disappointing year in recent memory for me specifically. And I think I speak for all of us here. This year was incredibly draining for content creators as a whole. And just the expectations that we had on some of the guys that we signed and like the offense that we thought was being put out there compared to what it ended up being was incredibly hard to watch. So yeah, I'd say 2024 was way more disappointing than 23.
Yeah, the 2024 season for me was definitely more disappointing than 23. Of course, coming into 23, they had just made the playoffs for the first time in forever. So expectations were high. You did expect to make the playoffs that year. I was excited for Colton Wong and for Teoscar Hernandez. Some of those guys, you would hope that Jared Kelnick would take the next step and become the prospect that he was. And then you head into the season and you have Tommy LaStella on your roster opening day. You got AJ Pollock. You still have Marco in the rotation. So you're still hopeful, but the expectations aren't nearly as high as coming into this year, to where we all knew that the Mariners starting rotation was going to be one of, if not the best starting rotation that the Mariners have had in franchise history. They also go out and get some solid bats on paper. They go out and get Jorge Polanco, Mitch Garver, all these guys. And, on the opening day roster, you look at, hey, Ty France is batting 8. That's a pretty good problem to have. If Ty France is your eight guy, that's just telling you how deep the roster is. Add on to that the Gregory Santos trade and various other moves, and the expectations were sky high. And you kind of flipped both seasons. 2023, around the midway point, they weren't where they wanted to be, but then they had the super hot streak when Julio got hot in August, and the remainder of that year, they went 24-6 after game 100 in 2023, and they led the AL with an 818 OPS in 50 games after July 1st. Flip it to 2024, and they start out super hot. They have a commanding lead of the division, up 10 games against the Astros. June 18th, they're up 10 games with a 91.7% chance to make the playoffs. And then they just free fall. And we thought the strikeout problem was there in 2023. It was on pace to be worse in 2024. You had the offseason hire of Brent Brown to be the offensive coordinator. Clearly that was not working. But then you look at the positives of this season. Once Dan Wilson and Edgar Martinez were hired as coaches, their offense completely turned around, and they were 4th in all of baseball in weighted runs created plus since they were hired. So overall, yeah, definitely more disappointing in 2024 than 23.
A lot of conversations we've had around this season is how it's been some of the most draining time watching and covering the team. I don't know if I was necessarily as drained as Colton was necessarily. I don't know if my emotions were as tied to it, but just from an objective standpoint, I think this season was more disappointing than 2023. I think you can kind of compare big acquisitions in the offseason and look at who was worse between Teo and Garver by a landslide. And then I guess Wong versus Polanco. But I think the landslide that is created from Garver compared to Teo outweighs whatever I guess you gain back from Polanco versus Wong, and just how much better the pitching staff was, and how everyone kind of took steps forward for the most part. Just being able to watch that night in, night out, and it not really amount to anything was pretty disappointing, to say the least. So I don't know if we're going to get someone that says 2023 was more disappointing than 24, honestly.
2024 for me is the most disappointing season in the history of Mariners baseball. It doesn't come close to me for 2023 because of expectations. I thought that going into 2023, I was pretty frustrated by what we didn't do going into 2023. I thought that the additions of, Pollock, the Cooper Hummels, making the opening day roster, your Tommy LaStellas, I was just really frustrated that we didn't do more. Going into 2024, I was sitting there going hey, Jorge Polanco, that's a big swing. Your Mitch Garver. I thought that he was going to be the closest thing that we've had since Edgar Martinez in our DH spot, and it just didn't pan out. And for me, it was just expectation, because I thought going into 2024, we can go toe to toe with anyone. I thought that, I was convinced of that, and it just didn't play out. And the way that the division played out, 2023 versus 2024, it's if you're not going to win the division in 2024, when the heck are you going to ever win the division? I mean, the Astros were riddled with injuries. Hader comes out the gate in April and is just a shell of himself. They're riddled with injuries. Tucker is injured for half the season. Verlander, they don't even have him for a majority of the year. The Rangers, the defending World Series champion, they are riddled with injuries. Simeon was kind of a shell of himself this year. They didn't have Corey Seager for the beginning of the year and a big stretch down in the middle of the season. It's if you aren't going to win the World Series, or not the World Series, if you're not going to win the division this season, when is it ever going to happen? And 2024 for me it's a big step in terms of disappointment. 2024 is a lot bigger disappointment than 2023 for me.
Yeah, most of the people have already hit on it. I mean, you blew a 10-game lead, and it only took you a month to do it. So that's pretty darn disappointing. But for me, the cherry on top that just puts 2024 over the top of 2023 is that this team, even after they blew the lead, they still had a shot to make the playoffs, and they got the help they needed. Like along the way, they got the help they needed. A couple wildcard teams had bad losing streaks. You just never really took advantage. You climbed your way back to within one game, and you were the first team out because the Twins collapsed harder than you did. Cool, I guess, but I think the 10-game lead is bad enough. But then you stack on top of it the fact that they had a legit shot to still make the playoffs, and they missed out by a game. Again, it is I think 5th time in the last 10 years they've missed the playoffs by one single game, or they were eliminated on game 161. Well, not technically, but you guys know what I'm saying. So it's this year. It's incredibly disappointing. And despite all of that, if you had won the game on June 7th against the Kansas City Royals, in which you led 8-0, you would have been in the playoffs. That's all it took, one blown lead, and you missed the playoffs because of it. You could also point to the 2 Yankee games you blew with 2 of the dumbest base running decisions we've ever seen, like in the history of baseball. Point to all of it. One game is one game, and you can point to any one game you want, but it's just incredibly disappointing that they were right there again. And once again, they fell short. And it just feels like it's a never-ending like dream that we're in where, yeah, the Mariners, they're probably going to get to the last weekend of the series. They're probably going to have a shot. They're probably going to come up short. That's just what they do. So this year just keeps on stacking on top of all the disappointment of every other year. So this year was more disappointing than 2023.
Colby, I'll just add one quick thing before the next person goes on that. 1-8 in your final 9 against the Angels. You can chalk that up too. If you're looking at losses that should have been wins, 1-8. I know they're not the White Sox, but they're not that far off.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I don't have a ton else to add. The one thing I'll say about 2024 is I enjoyed 2024 for longer. I mean, I think 2023 was so frustrating for the first 4 months, and then obviously August was great. It was a lot of August, though. August, first of all, wasn't that long of a stretch, but the stretch was a lot of it was like, oh wow, like this is what we should have been doing the whole time. And by the time it was like, all right, we're rolling, we're back, they had that terrible September. Mid-April through mid-June for me this year was by far the best stretch of the 2 seasons. I really, really had fun watching this team kind of defy the fact that they were hitting like garbage and pull win after win out. I have a hard time looking at anything as more disappointing than 2024. I mean, Scott Service is the longest tenured manager besides Lou Piniella in the history of the franchise, and he gets canned halfway through because they play so badly from the front. So, I mean, there's nothing more disappointing than that, and obviously encouraged by how they played at the end of the season, but yeah, I mean, 2024 was brutal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I don't really know what else you can say other than, I mean, look, it was the step back to the step back, right? Like, and had you made the playoffs this year, you could look at 2023 as more of just kind of an outlier. Like, you know, just some things didn't go your way, and you know, unfortunately, you didn't make the playoffs, and you know, but this year you got things back on track. And you know, while you did waste some really good things in 2023, like a career year from JP Crawford, for example, I felt like you even wasted more this year. Obviously, you know, you can start with the rotation, the great year that Cal had, you know, Victor Robles turning into essentially an all-star since coming over to the Mariners. And I think what's really disappointing is just the overall inconsistencies throughout the team, right? The inconsistencies of the offense as a whole, the inconsistencies in Julio's season, the inconsistencies in the home road splits for the rotation. You know, obviously we didn't get to see what this bullpen could look like at full strength. I think that's really maybe one of the more underrated, disappointing aspects of this year is just like you never got to see what this bullpen looked like at full strength with, you know, Santos and Brash and Munoz rolling. And so that obviously put some of those, you know, guys like Trent Thornton and Austin Voth and Ryan Stanek in positions that you probably didn't want them in. And that also, you know, helped you, or rather did not help you late in games. So, I would just kind of summarize it as, you know, how I started this whole thing. It was the step back to the step back of 2023.
2024 is more frustrating because of the missed opportunities that were in front of this team, and everybody's already named them, right? The division was weaker. The Astros were bad. The Astros were injured. You had a fully healthy pitching staff for the most part that was essentially wasted. The big moves you took that we've asked the franchise to take didn't pan out. That's incredibly frustrating. It's an incredible amount of missed opportunities that will take me a very long time as a fan to get over. That said, I'm not really in the mood to rank my heartaches. Like, we ended up in the same spot both years. You missed the playoffs by a game. They're equal. They're both frustrating, and they're frustrating for different reasons, and they were frustrating at different times, but we end up in the exact same place. The Mariners have consistently done this to all of us for the entirety of our lives. And some of us are older than others, but like, I've been a Mariners fan for 34 years now. And 30 of those years, I've been disappointed at the end of them. Like, this is just what happens every year with this franchise. And it comes in different packaging every year, but we end up in the same spot. So I'm not really in the mood to rank my heartbreaks, and I'm not really in the mood to think about which one was worse. They missed the playoffs by one game in 2 consecutive years. They had opportunities in both years to make the playoffs and didn't. And this year, they went 5-8 against the Angels. They got beaten series by the Nationals, Marlins, and Pirates. Like, we can complain about Scott and Jerry and the moves and all we want, and Stanton and the money. This team should have still been in the playoffs. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The team as constructed, as much as we want to complain about everybody involved in it, still should have been in the playoffs. But they got beat by the Marlins, the Pirates, and the Nationals, and went 5-8 against the Angels, and that's what kept them out.
I would say the same thing. All the momentum you had from 2022 is now gone. In 2021, you win 90 games, and everybody feels like we are right on the doorstep. We're right there. 2022, they win 90 again. This time they get in. They should have done more in 23. But sometimes that'll happen, right? Where we've been prone to seeing bad luck go the Mariners' way over the 20-year drought that they were in, where they'd win X amount of games, but it just happened to be a good field that year where they'd miss the playoffs with 86, 87, 88 wins, whatever it's been in some years. 2023, they should have done more. They should have done more at that deadline, but in the end, they still won 88 games. And in a lot of years, this year, for example, it would have gotten you in, but it didn't. That happens sometimes where you hope, okay, they missed it this year. You bounce back in 24. No, they did not bounce back in 24. For 4.5 months, the offense was, as we all know, abysmal. Despite getting the help they needed, they still only win 85 games. Obviously, guys go down with injuries. And you know what honestly puts the cherry on top of all of it? Because it was draining. Like, to Colton's point, this is as drained as I've ever been watching a Mariners season. There have been some bad years. For where the expectations were paired to where they finished the year, I've never been so drained watching a season. And to just cap it all off, right after the season ends, after game 162, I say to myself, it's finally over. I'm going to relax. I'm going to reset. I'm going to take some time off, only for the next day to have an article come out where the owners say, oh, you know how we can win some brownie points with fans? Let's actually tell them, we're going to be transparent and tell everybody, well, we're not going to spend it all this offseason on any free agents or any top end free agents, because that's actually not a smart strategy. So less than 24 hours into what was supposed to be a relaxing offseason, then we get that. And I start spiraling again. So, man, maybe my energy level's too high for this. I don't know. So, like, to cap this all off, yeah, 2024 was more disappointing than 23. It was way more than 23 for me, especially when you add all that stuff at the end.
Can't we just go like a week without having to hear something stupid from this baseball team?
John Stanton is tragically bad with the media. Tragically bad.
When I didn't even read it right away, and yeah, and I was like, I already know this is going to be some stuff.
You know, I had wrapped up with an early morning show that day, and obviously, like, a lot of the times when you get up at 4 a.m., you're kind of ready to sometimes fall asleep in the afternoon. I was getting ready to do that. That article comes out, and forget the nap, because I just start seeing red right after that article comes out. I was like, are you kidding me with this?
John Stanton is your sleep paralysis demon.
Yeah, it is.
A viewer question from Mitchell Hopkins on YT. Seeing what the Tigers are doing with the small payroll, is there any validity to the people who say, why can't the Mariners do that too? I will note that Mitchell did say that he believes it's because the Tigers have been getting higher draft picks for many years, whereas the Mariners have been more in the middle of the pack of that, which leads to better prospects.
Either give me a higher payroll or give me a new president of baseball operations. I'm not going to beat around the bush on this one. No, there's no validity to the higher draft picks either. I'm sorry. Have the Mariners not hit their first round draft picks out of the park for pretty much the last decade? Yeah, you've had some hiccups. You've had Evan White that did not pan out. Oops. Emerson Hancock, again, go look at that 2020 draft during the COVID year and let me know how that draft went for literally everybody. The draft was a mess because it was impossible to be able to scout. It was impossible to be able to evaluate talent. And you were basically going off of stuff from the previous year. Emerson Hancock, and all things considered, still hasn't even really been that bad in comparison to the rest of the first round. Like, even with him not being in a sense, what you should have expected to be the best pitcher you got out of all of your draft picks. If we're going by the, well, we were drafting the highest when we took him argument, it doesn't matter. They've hit on their picks. Hitting on picks has not been the problem. Being the problem has been the same issue that they ran into in, that 2015, 2016 window when they had the higher payroll, yes, but they just weren't willing to go a little bit more. They were not willing to do it. And that led to David Phelps, and that led to Adam Lind. And it was not the pieces you need. It was that stone cold soberness that you felt when it said the Mariners were involved in the David Price trade and you got Austin Jackson. You were just like, what is this? This is not what we were expecting. No, I do think there is a full-blown correlation to money because, can you sign bad deals? Sure. Are all free agents going to work out? No, it's not going to happen that way. But the Dodgers won 98 games this year without an entire rotation. The Braves almost made the playoffs without having Acuna for the entire year and having other key players. Austin Riley barely played the entire season. And when he did, he was terrible. They could not have had more things go wrong, and they were still right there and made the playoffs. The problem I run into is you see what the Braves can do, you see what the Mets will do, you see what the other big spenders. We're not expecting that, but when you have talented players and you spend the money to be able to fill in those margins, it gives you a better chance, God forbid things go wrong. If this team lost Julio for an entire season this year, they wouldn't have finished above 500. The Braves made the playoffs without their better version of Julio and without a lot of other pieces as well. So you get teams like the Tigers that happen all the time. I mean, the Diamondbacks did it last year when they made the run. Sometimes it's just the right place, right time. And again, you got to remember, like, AJ Hinch is no schmuck. Like, we can talk about how much the Astros could have cheated their way to World Series titles and all that stuff, but it doesn't matter. Hinch is a very good manager and is a proven winner. It was a matter of time before Detroit was going to figure out how to win. And again, when you're having former Mariner great Will Vest throw 5 shutout innings in the postseason, like, I'm sorry, that would be the equivalent of Trent Thornton for us basically deciding, I'm going to be a death merchant for the entire postseason. That's basically what's happening right now. So again, we don't need to be a $300 million team to be able to win. But if you cannot win within the constraints that are part of the job, you cannot be here. And that is my problem. And again, I don't want to hear about other GMs who have done more with less, because we all know the story and we all get it. It happens. We've also been going at this for 9 years. And there's no justification for one playoff appearance, regardless of how the wins have been for the last 4 years. That's also an example of, well, those extra couple of wins could have come from, I don't know, signing literally anyone, not AJ Pollock and Tommy La Stella. Again, we liked Polanco and Garver. I feel like that was a pretty universal agreement in the offseason, but it didn't work. It doesn't mean you shouldn't stop, or it doesn't mean you should stop spending because it didn't work.
My Tigers I picked at the beginning of the year to win the AL Central. Who could have seen this coming?
They didn't. You were wrong.
I was wrong. I mean, yeah, but
Fact check.
just saying, they made the playoffs and we didn't, guys. So no, the meme is Colton and I are Squidward looking down on Patrick and SpongeBob having fun, like that meme, and those are the Tigers and the Royals having fun because we both picked them to win the AL Central. I don't think there's validity to it. I think there's there's definitely like the stroke of luck that kind of happens. Like, I think the best case scenario for wanting the team to spend more money happened with the championship series, specifically with the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Mets all advancing the championship series. I think that is, if you're wanting the team to spend more money, you're happy about that from like that perspective, regardless of whether or not you want the intolerable fan bases of the Yankees and the Dodgers to have some more stuff to kind of like rally for years on end. But for the Tigers, I mean, they got a really great year out of Riley Green. Obviously, they're going to have the American League Cy Young winner and Skubal. So I don't think it was like they were necessarily like this like unsung situation, because a lot of the pieces were kind of there. Some of them fell off. Like Torkelson had a terrible year, but did come back up later in the year and like tried to help out in some capacity. But it was a lot of like plug and play, figuring it out. Great managing by AJ Hinch that I think allowed them to get hot at the right time and just kind of win with the power of friendship. I don't think that the Mariners necessarily have like the facilities for that big man kind of a situation. Like the Rays do it every year. Yet now we're like speaking on the Tigers because the Rays had a down year in that situation. So there's going to be a team every single year that has like a very low operating cost and wins a lot of games because like that's baseball. And I know that's baseball comment is going to it's a little people aren't very fond of that one, but I think that you look at even like the Diamondbacks in 23, they won 84 games and they made it into the postseason and they made it to the World Series. Like there's going to be a team every single year that has that kind of situation happen where they're probably not supposed to be there, but they are.
Yeah, a couple things about this. I think first of all, with the Tigers, I think AJ Hinch is a huge part of what they've accomplished. He's a phenomenal manager. I'd say he's top 5 easily, if not like 1 or 2 in the league, and he's proved that, and he's a proven winner with what he was able to do with the early Astros. Some shenanigans involved, and he paid the price for that, but he's come back with this under-talented, to say the least, Tigers squad, and they have absolutely kicked way above their level for the last 2 months. And yeah, I think vibes is also a huge part of it. I mean, you can't have a team of guys that have never been there and never done that believe that they can beat anybody across the diamond on a given night like this, like they've been playing for the last 2 months, without tremendous self-belief instilled in them from the top down. And the Mariners had that in 2022. They don't have that right now. And I think some of what the toxic behavior from the top of the organization has spoiled a lot of that. And I mean, you've seen it, examples of it time and time again, of the restrictions from ownership and some of the commentary from Jerry in getting in the way of positive feeling in the clubhouse. So, I mean, I think that's definitely something that's been the Tigers' formula that the Mariners just don't have at the moment. In terms of payroll, I think it's too late to magically raise the payroll. Like if you told me that the Mariners are going into next season with a payroll of $200 million, I mean, that would be excellent. I would hope that they would try to like just throw god tier money at Alex Bregman if you could guarantee me that contract wouldn't hurt the team at any point, because you're committed to carrying that contract for as long as it makes sense. But I think they've needed to have the payroll in that range 180 minimum for the last 3 years, and their inability to do that has them so far behind, and now facing these windows where these free agents are just not very sure thing positively impact the team and take it to the next level type guys. I think the payroll absolutely needs to be at a point where the Mariners do not have to make moves that make their franchise less valuable from an organizational standpoint by attaching prospects to get rid of salaries to be able to have the maneuverability to improve the team. I think as long as it's above that, they should be able to succeed in the current context. But I mean, they've missed the boat on raising payroll. I mean, the 2020, 2021, and 2022 free agency classes were all, or post those seasons, I should say. So not last year and not this year, were all awesome free agency classes that they could have competed in, and they just did not because of both ownership frugality and the place where the plan was. And the Rangers showed you perfectly that you do not need to be there to have the big free agent contracts pay off. And they got Seager, they got Semien, they sucked the first year that they were on the team, and then they won the World Series the next year with those two guys leading them the whole way. So the Mariners missed the boat on payroll, but yes, payroll should absolutely be 180 million minimum.
Again, to your point about the 200 million number.
Yeah.
Like, listen, we're going to call it a real free agency and not a faux free agency, because I don't think anybody expected Ohtani to sign anywhere other than the Dodgers. I think that's just a straight up fact.
For sure. But I mean, again,
Juan Soto has no allegiances. If they win the World Series in New York this year, I think there's a possibility that he would re-sign. I think the Nationals are very intriguing. But the fact that you've essentially said, yeah, we're not interested in a hitter younger than Bryce Miller, who's the best damn hitter on the planet, and you could have him and Julio for the next 15 years, and you're not even considering it.
Yeah, well, the problem is it eats itself, right? When you remove yourself from one free agent cycle, free agents assume that you are not
interested.
part, and they're not interested. And if you don't consistently come to the table year after year with we can spend $50 million in free agency, and couple that with you have the worst ballpark to hit in the league right now, based on various factors. You can't suddenly show up tomorrow with 50 extra million dollars to spend and compete for Alex Bregman, because Alex Bregman's just not going to give you the time of day.
The short answer is no, there's no validity to it. I mean, you look at the teams that were in the playoffs this year. The top 6 teams in payroll all made the playoffs this year. 5 of the teams in between 20 and 30 in payroll were also in the playoffs, but all of them are gone now, except for I think the Guardians. You look at the teams that have won the World Series over the last X amount of years, they're usually in the top 5 to 10 in payroll. Like, I'm not saying that spending money is the only answer. We have seen the Mets, for example, spend the most money in baseball and miss the playoffs. Like, there are plenty of different reasons why that could happen, but for the Mariners specifically, it's the fact that they have never done it. Like they signed the Robinson Cano contract, and obviously you look at what was happening. I think that those teams it was poorly run. Jack Zduriencik sucks. Like, but you look at where they were going, they were putting the money on the field in Robinson Cano, Nelson Cruz, Felix Hernandez. They were spending the money, and in the end, that came back to bite them because Jack Zduriencik's bad at his job. But I think that in terms of how the money is allocated, it doesn't need to all be in top end guys. Like you have, like Logan Gilbert's going to start making some money this year, but it's not a ton. But Logan Gilbert's probably worth $20+ million a year easily, right? But you don't have to pay him that because hey, you got young guys. That is how dynasties are built. That's how the Astros were built over however many years. That's how the Braves were built, in my opinion. That you cycle through having a really good farm system and you begin to cycle guys in and out. The Astros, of course, we've seen it. Jeremy Pena comes up for Carlos Correa. They were able to throw Yordan in there, Kyle Tucker, etc. Like they have the ability to continue to cycle through guys as some guys start to leave. They also extend guys like Jose Altuve. And I think that because of that, there's a very clear blueprint onto how things should be run in terms of maybe don't be the Rockies. Like maybe don't go spend like however much money they spent on Chris Bryant and then let Nolan Arenado walk. It doesn't make sense. Like there's a clear blueprint when it comes to the dynasty teams in baseball. Some are bought, like the Dodgers. They have clearly spent a ton of money, put the best guys out there on the field. But one way or another, you have to spend money. You more often than not are not going to get to the playoffs with a $19 million payroll or whatever the hell it was that the Tigers had this year. It's just not going to happen. And because of that, I don't think there's any validity to that statement.
In the Mariners' specific circumstance, yes, it is necessary for them to spend more. I think that Jerry and Stanton are a horrible match because Jerry needs a bigger budget. I think what he sold to Stanton was I can do it cheaper, and he can't. He doesn't have the ability to. He has got the ability of building a wicked farm system time and time again. He's got an ability of building assets, but turning that into a sustainable winner, which was his, that's what he got him in trouble last year, right? Was the 54%. We're building a sustainable model, and he's not able to do it with the budget that he's given. So, I'm looking at a guy like, Bregman sitting there. You put Bregman on the 2024 Mariners. I mean, holy crap, we're cooking, and that's what this team needs to push it over the top. And it's frustrating because the whole narrative, the Jerry DiPoto, the 54% thing, I actually don't think that the 54% thing is all that terrible of a thing to say. Now, should he have said it? No, but the concept, and this is where the Tigers come into play, is you get into the playoffs, it turns into March Madness real fast, and you got Cinderella's knocking off one seeds. It happens every year, and there is the reality of if you make the playoffs 10 years in a row, like Jerry DiPoto said, you are probably going to win a World Series. The problem is we're not making the playoffs, so we need to change the calculus because this is not working, and we need to raise payroll, get better players. We need to get better, and I think a lot of Mariners fans get caught up in the payroll. I'm not paying their salaries. I don't care. I just want to get better. I just want a better baseball team. I want a team that we start the next season and the other, 29 teams are going, oh crap, look what the Mariners put together. I don't care what the number is. I don't care what the payroll is. I just want that team.
As sports fans, we all try to look for like the one size fits all answer, the very comfortable answer, because it's easy, right? It's an easy pill to swallow. But that just isn't the case, especially with roster building in baseball. At the end of the day, go get good players and don't shut yourself off from any avenue that allows you to go get good players, right? That's really the thing behind wanting the Mariners to spend money. It's not even just because, look, you can spend money and, like Colton was saying, be the Rockies and just throw money out recklessly just for the sake of doing it, right? And I do think that there's fans out there that just want the Mariners to just do that no matter what. Like, we need to have a $230 million payroll no matter what it looks like. Look, if you win the World Series with a $32 million payroll or a $230 million payroll, doesn't matter. You won the World Series. Great. Awesome. Love that. And as long as you're able to build a product that can do that again and again and again, or at least contend for that again and again and again, that's all that matters. But you cannot shut yourself off from any avenue to go out and get better. You can't have it, right? It's absolutely inexcusable. Doesn't mean that you have to then go down every avenue, but as long as you have those options available to you, that's what's most important. So yeah, look, there are different roster builds for every team that can work and not work, right? And the Mariners tried to approach things in the in the mid 2010s similar to how the Royals did when they went to back-to-back World Series, and it didn't work out as well for the Mariners, right? Like, again, it's just, you're not, like, what works for one team might not work for the 29 others, right? So you just kind of have to find what works for you. And again, the name of the game is just get good baseball players. I don't think there's any validity really to, like, should they approach things the way the Tigers do? I don't even know what was the question.
It was more or less saying, like, because the Tigers have a small payroll and they made it to the playoffs and whatnot,
right,
whereas we didn't. So when people say, why can't the Mariners be successful too, like the Tigers, who has a much smaller payroll than they do, that was basically the question.
Yeah, I mean, again, some of that is, I forget who mentioned it earlier, like, some of that is because you've had high draft picks. Some of it is just straight up luck, right? Like, it just, everything kind of has to fall into the right place. Again, there isn't a one size fits all answer to the problem here. Were the Mariners, or did Jerry Dipoto and the front office fail in working with the money that they did have this offseason? Yes, absolutely, unequivocally. The only player that they acquired that worked out was Luke Raley. Yeah, we can absolutely address that, but in a much more broader term here, or in a much more broader conversation here, what the Tigers did is very rare. It's a very, very tight window to fit through what they did. It's a great story, but that's not the ideal way to build your ball club. Because again, it involves so many things going right, and you just can't bake on that on a year-to-year basis. You have to at least invest in your ball club to some degree.
Look, man, the Tigers are great for baseball, right? It's great for baseball that another fan base is engaged. It's great for baseball that there are multiple teams that can kind of come out of nowhere or can sneak up on you, or you're never really out of it. That's great for baseball. That's great for fans. That's great for fan bases that are used to being out of it by June. That said, I would like the Mariners to go out of their way to build a 92 win roster. When we see the Zips and Pacoda projections in February, I would like the Mariners to read 92 wins. So you know what? If they get a little bit lucky, they win 95, and 95 is winning the division. If they're a little bit unlucky and slip, they win 88, and 88 makes you the playoffs. What I am tired of doing is them building 84 win rosters and hoping to hit a little bit higher than that and get to 86 or 87, which it sometimes gets in and sometimes doesn't. Like, build a 92 win roster. So 3 wins above, you're winning the division. 3 wins below, you're the number 1 wild card team. I'm tired of the 84 win projections that end up with, like, well, hey, maybe it's 81 or maybe it's 86, and neither one of those are good enough in most years.
I think what they do a lot too is they'll build the 84 win team and keep their fingers crossed that the deadline pushes them over the top, and by that time it's too late.
And you know what's so crazy too is, like, and I haven't done any crunching of numbers on this, but, like, since the extra inning rules changed, like just there's so much flukiness that happens over the course of a season. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like in 23, the Mariners lost like every extra inning game they play. And I know they actually didn't, but like it feels that way. Or they had like 11 walk-off losses this year or something like that. There's so much flukiness that happens with the way baseball is now that even if you're projected to win 84, you end up going 1-11 in extras one year or 11-1 in extras one year, and everything totally spins on its head.
Dude, when I tell you TJ and I were preying on the Tigers' downfall in these playoffs, we were preying on the Tigers' downfall in these playoffs because owners already have enough incentive as it is to do absolutely nothing. If these teams saw an $18 million payroll playoff roster make some run to the World Series, there would absolutely be owners across baseball that would see that and just in a nutshell say, well, we can start doing this. We don't have to pay anybody. We can run out a $20 million payroll and just win. In fact, my exact quote on one of our shows about a week ago when the Tigers started to have playoff success was, I have a vision right now of Chris Larson doing the gritty, seeing the Tigers win like this in the playoffs. Because that is exactly that is the type of thing that owners need to see. It can be one small example like that for them to say, oh, well, we can just do that, because owners don't often think in a sound baseball manner. Most of them don't. The good ones do. But look, this is what drives me crazy at this point about like the Mariners refusing to not go after free agents. Because yeah, like to answer the question, just like straight on, that's not a sustainable product. Running one starter out there and then a bunch of bullpen games and also basically having 1.5 bats, one of them who's a platoon bat, that's not sustainable. There's a reason they lost. There's a reason they lost to another team that also doesn't spend a lot of money. And while they have a more sound roster in the Guardians, it's not the model I would build after either. Like, this is what drives me crazy about the Mariners not spending any money is TJ and I have talked about this a decent amount over the last couple weeks now, is the Mariners have tried every other avenue to get better offensively, and we're still here. They have tried signing mid-tier free agents. They've tried signing low-end free agents. They've tried trading for ascending players. They've tried trading for descending players. They've tried drafting and developing. And how many prospects have they really gotten out of that farm system to help offensively? Well, 2, at least in this core right now, 2. So here we still sit with an avalanche of offensive problems. And the one avenue they won't try is actually going and acquiring elite talent because they say that's not a good strategy. So that's what drives me crazy about how the Mariners are operating right now. And to the point of the Tigers, how many times are we really going to see this happen? Again, I think it's totally unsustainable, and we were rooting against it about as hard as possible because the more they won, I think the worse off it is for baseball. So yeah, I don't think this Tigers thing is real or sustainable.
Yeah, what I'll say is that if they want to be as competitive as they can and extend their runway for as long as they can, then they absolutely do need to spend more as these guys get deeper into their rookie contracts and into arbitration. Hopefully you sign some of these guys to long-term deals. You do need to spend more money. In the same light, personally, I think that the Mariners have done a great job of scouting, developing, drafting, and trading for the most part. And, if they go the route of keeping payroll low and continuing to trade guys as they get expensive, then that's the way that they go about it. I hope that they, at that point, it's like you need new ownership. You need someone that's willing to spend the money to get it done. But in the same light, I do think they've done a good job of scouting and developing and trading. So
yeah, even though Lyle made terrific points, I'm going to undercut the smallest one just to make myself feel better. The Mariners have only produced 2 bats so far. Now you got to remember that early on in the process, they were drafting a lot of pitching, and they nailed it. They nailed the pitching side, and now the early returns on the hitters look okay, at least in the minors. But obviously, I agree with everything else you're saying. This is bad. Like, there's an argument to be made that one of the worst things that ever happened to Major League Baseball is the book Moneyball, which is my favorite book. I read it at least once a year. Love the movie. I love the idea behind it. But it just gave these billionaires reasons to pinch pennies on the, $100 million that they're being asked to spend on their baseball team. Because they're like, well, look, you don't have to spend money to win. And they'll ignore the fact that the 3 teams with the highest payroll in baseball are all playing for the World Series, to go to the World Series next week. They'll ignore the fact that a team that was, I think, 6th in payroll won the World Series last year. Like, they'll ignore that to chase that one very specific way to try and win. And by the way, the team that's done it with the most success over the last decade has been the Tampa Bay Rays. they've only gotten to one World Series. They haven't even really gotten close since. And it was the COVID season World Series where Randy Arozarena was the best player on the planet for 2 weeks. Like, it's not a sustainable model. And when you look at the Tigers specifically, no disrespect to them, their run was incredible. Like, my hat's off to them. That's not a good roster. It's not. They have a couple good bullpen pieces. They have the best pitcher in the American League. That'll take you pretty far on its own. They have Riley Green. They have Kerry Carpenter, who against right-handed pitching is essentially Ketel Marte, Bryce Harper. Against left-handed pitching, he's essentially Dominic Canzone. So they have two pretty good hitters, right? And then they got a pretty decent year from Vierling. They got, they have a bunch of platoons that worked out, blah, blah, blah. It's not a sustainable model. And what it took for that Tigers team to make the playoffs, it took a Mariners collapse, it took a Royals collapse, and it took a Twins collapse. The Tigers just happened to be playing really good baseball in the last month of the season. And those three other teams, the Mariners in this case, had already lost, even though they were starting to play good baseball. That 1-8 road trip basically sunk them, including the 5 of 6 they lost to the Tigers, pretty much sunk them. The Royals had to lose 7 in a row at the end of the year for that to become a race. The Twins, I think they went like 8-17 or something in the month of September. And the Tigers got in with 86 wins. That's not a sustainable, repeatable model. So the idea that the Tigers got in, so that makes it, the blueprint or whatever. No, because you don't really get to say this type of stuff when the Tigers got in ahead of you, largely on the backs of beating the crap out of you for a couple weeks. The Tigers got lucky. Like, this is a build that got lucky. There was no shot, none, that the Tigers built this team to be a playoff team. It was an accident. They sold at the deadline. For most of this year, the Mariners had significantly higher playoff odds than the Tigers. The Tigers got hot. Good for them. They played their best baseball in the last few weeks while the Royals sucked, the Twins sucked, and the Mariners had dug themselves too big of a hole. This is not a sustainable model, and it's bad for baseball that teams would look at this and say, like, yeah, we'll just do that. And, you look at the teams who do this, like, purposefully and are pretty good at it, and they have runs of success. You look at a team like the Guardians, you look at the team like the Rays. What has it won them in the grand scheme of things? Nothing. Really nothing. Nothing of significance. So, it's just not a sustainable model. It sucks. And I don't get why, as Mariner fans, now I don't think this is Mariner fans. This is definitely Mariners ownership. But Mariners fans should be, if you're looking for a model to emulate, as annoying as it is, it's the Houston Astros, who went to 7 straight ALCSs. They spent money, but they also drafted, they developed, they knew when to let guys go, they knew when to trade guys, and they extended a few guys, right? That's the model. If you want a different team because you refuse to compare yourself to the Astros, even though they're literally who you should be comparing yourself against, the Atlanta Braves, who traded for a bunch of guys, extended pretty much all of them, and that's where they spent their money. The Braves didn't spend huge in free agency. They traded for guys because they had a loaded up farm system, kind of like the Mariners do right now, and then they extended them. Those are the models that you should be following, and neither one of those models really spends a ton in free agency. The Astros don't spend a ton in free agency. The Braves don't spend a ton in free agency. They spend a ton, but not necessarily in free agency. The Dodgers, before this last offseason, they didn't spend a ton in free agency. And then they went out and they handed up $1 billion to 2 guys and kind of flipped that mode on its head. But the Dodgers were built through trade. The Dodgers were built through draft and develop. But the Dodgers also spend money. And when the time is right and when they feel like they're in their window, they'll absolutely go and spend money. And that's the difference between the Mariners and the Dodgers, the Mariners and the Astros. The Mariners are in their window right now. No question about it. And ownership won't go spend the money to put them over the top, which is the things the Astros did, which is what the Braves do, which is what the Yankees do. It's what the great teams do. When they're in range and they feel like they're in their window, they'll spend a little more than maybe even they're comfortable with, and they know they'll reap the benefits of it afterwards. And then maybe you have to drop payroll a little bit for a couple of years before you get back to that spot, but that's fine. So yeah, the Tigers got lucky, and my hat's off to them. Great run. It is not a sustainable model. It is not, a model that anybody should be trying to emulate. It doesn't work. It's not repeatable enough. Like the two or three teams that can do it, they're the unicorns in this league. Everybody else who's trying to do it, they're the Pittsburgh Pirates. Whoop-de-doo. So yeah, no, saying like, oh, the Tigers didn't spend, so is it really necessary that the Mariners do? Yeah, because the Tigers got lucky.
Yeah, I was rooting against the Tigers' downfall because they were one of the reasons the Mariners didn't get in the playoffs this year. All the one-run wins they killed us with, along with the other issues as well. But I'm kind of salty. Like, I hate the Tigers. I don't care if the Angels were a 100-loss team. I hate everything about the Angels right now. So, but no, I mean, like, sure, fine. Yeah, I mean, if the Tigers can do it, can the Mariners do it? Yeah, I mean, Mariners could cut payroll next year and win because Julio could have an MVP season. So could Cal. Rotation's great and bullpen bounces back. Like, sure. But again, to everybody's point, it's not sustainable to be doing it that way. It doesn't mean it can't happen. Nothing's ever 0 or 100%, especially in the sports world. But yeah, it's not a sustainable model to continue winning. And to everybody's point here, just to piggyback that everybody made great points, but there's multiple ways to do it. I think Colby hit the nail on the head talking about the free agency to put this team over the top. They are in their window right now. I don't want the team to build off free agency. In fact, look at the Tigers. I mean, who's the most expensive player on that team? It's Javi Baez. I mean, is he still on the team? But like Javi Baez, an awful free agent contract, which still drives me nuts that he hit that home run off Munoz. But anyways, the Rockies with Chris Bryant, Trevor Story in Boston, there are definitely free agent landmines. And I'm not ever going to come on and say Mariners just need to spend just to spend, and who cares who it is, give out money. But when you've got a team, in my opinion, the Mariners that are knocking on the door, I still believe this team can win a World Series. If you told me, like, Jay, next year the Mariners win the World Series, I'd be shocked just as a fan and what we've been through. But roster wise, I really would not be completely shocked that this team is doing that. I think they're capable, but I think they need to use the free agency market to help push them over the top. I think there's guys there that can really bring this thing home where you don't have to do a lot of the trades. They've got to that point. I think through the way they've done it's been correct, but I think they need to use the free agent market to kind of push themselves over the top here, essentially. It's just something they just don't seem to be willing to do outside of more of the supplemental pieces, which are fine. You need those guys. The AJ Pollocks, when they're right, can help you as a platoon bat, but that can't be like your answer in free agency, essentially. So no, I don't think it's a sustainable thing. I'm with everybody here. I think the Tigers, listen, if any Tigers fans are watching this, congratulations, great season. I might get ripped for this. I think the Mariners are a better team than the Tigers, honestly. I think if you put them together tomorrow, I would predict the Mariners to win the series. Baseball's weird, things happen. But no, I don't think it's a sustainable model to use. And like I said, only a couple teams have done it, Rays, Guardians, and even those teams don't have the World Series rings to show for it. So yeah, no, it can happen, it can work, but it's not something that I'd rely on.